So let's take a look at the Acropolis in specific. The entrance to the Acropolis is the Propylaea, and as I mentioned, it unified the two orders. It used Doric order on the front and back, and inside it uses the Ionic order. The Ionic order being narrower and taller is suitable to support the interior, which had a higher ceiling to support, and the front and the back present a more robust face to the exterior. Excuse me. Here I want to point out from the very beginning, the Acropolis shows a very different kind of ordering compared to the Greek, to the Egyptian and Mesopotamian architecture. It does not have exact symmetry, rather it has a balance. So there is no exact symmetry, but it creates a sense of balance. For example, in the middle, we have the front, which is the pediment side of the temple, which is symmetrical, but the two side building are not symmetrical, right? On the left side is a gallery, which is lower and more simplistic, not as much decorated, and wider. On the right side, we have the Temple of Nike, elevated on a higher platform. It is smaller, but it is higher and at the same time more elaborately carved in the Ionic Order. So we have low, big, simple versus high, small, and complicated. So we have, it's like, you know, instead of having perfect symmetry as in the previous traditions we covered, here it created a balance. On one hand, you have something, and on the other side, you know, you have a more complicated. But it gives you a feeling they both used similar amount of ink and thus created similar weight, right? So this created a balance instead of exact symmetry. The same thing can be talked about. By the way, this is the Temple of Nike, all right? It's used Ionic Order and it's kind of more complicated with the shadows and capitals. It carried more weight than its size. Same can be said to the interior of Acropolis. On the right side, we have a bigger, simpler, more robust Parthenon. On the other side, we have the more complicated but smaller Erechtheion. So they also created a balance, but that balance was the opposite. So the complicated side is on the left and the big side and simplistic style is on the right. So it created this very dynamic balance. And this kind of balanced order is also carried out in Greek sculpture. In Greek sculpture, there is a term called contrapposto. Contrapposto refers to the sculpting of the human body, where the human body is not presented symmetrically like the Egyptian statue. You know, if you now picture an Egyptian statue, it all shows the front face and the two shoulders perfectly symmetrically kind of leveled. But contrapposto human figure, you know, one shoulder is up, but the same side, the hip is lower. And on the other side, the shoulder is lower, but the hip is higher. and the two arms, one is higher, the other is lower, and one is more front, another is on the side of the body. So you still feel the balance, but it's not exact symmetry, right? So it's to some extent the same principle in classical sculpture of contrapposto was applied to the large scale of the planning of the whole complex. So all a balance instead of perfect symmetry. So Temple of Nike dedicated to the god of victory, and it is overlooking the coast of Sea of Salamis, where the Greek fleet defeated the Persian fleet. So a celebration of the victory in the Persian War. This is a more complicated Erechtheum on the left side. So the Periclean reconstruction of Acropolis made some rearrangement of the former temples. The old Parthenon used to be more centrally located, but after the 5th century reconstruction, it was moved to the side and left the central ground a square for festival celebration. And that way, the processional ritual surrounding the hillside can always have the temple in vision. And that way also the temple was more visible in the city at large. So from far away, you can see the temple of Parthenon or the temple of Erechtheum. So they were all arranged to the edge of the hilltop instead of located in the center. So the mythology associated with Erechtheum was the founding of Athens as a polis, as a city-state. The competition between Poseidon and Athena over the guardianship of the city. Poseidon offered the sea spring, the water spring, or in another version, the horse, and Athena offered olive tree. So, and the Greek citizens elected them, they like olive tree better. So Athena became the patron goddess. So in their very mythology, you feel this kind of democracy in it and humanity. Human was not necessarily, it's not God, not hero, but human is significant. And they sometimes even intervene in the divine affairs, like the famous story of the golden apple that, Pallas judged the 3 supreme goddess who is the most beautiful, and that led to the Trojan War, right? So in those stories, you feel that kind of democratic spirit in their religion, and that was also their politics. And the complicated shape of Erechtheum was also resulted from the uneven topography and also the sophisticated functionality to be sheltered. While Parthenon, its function was simple. Even though the temple was big, it was just dedicated to Athena, but here it was dedicated to many, many gods and many ancestral kings. There were altars dedicated to Zeus, the supreme heavenly god, Olympian lord. And there were also temples dedicated to Athena, of course, here, and Poseidon, and Erechthus, who was the legendary founding king of Athens. So they were all within this complex. So as a result, space were more divided, and it got a quite irregular shape. The most famous part of Erechthum is the maiden porch, which is on the southern side of Erechthum, facing directly Parthenon, the temple of Parthenon. So this is the maiden porch. These column shaped into a standing human figure is known as caryatid, right? So today they were much appreciated as masterpieces in Greek sculpture, but from Vitruvius, we also understand that there was also great atrocity behind the name of caryatid. It was the name of a Greek city-state called Caria, whose citizens were massacred because they sided with the Persians during the war, and their women were punished to hold the load of their architecture. Today, the originals were all moved to museums, so if you go there on site, these were all replicas. Ionic orders were used for exterior as well as interior to create a contrasting stylistic image to the neighboring Parthenon. So we have this very slender columns, very narrow space in the porch, and this is the east side, this side. Now let's take a look at Parthenon. Parthenon, completed in 436 BCE, was primarily a Doric order. However, it incorporated Ionic concept into this Doric temple. First, it is basically a single peristyle, right? There's only one circulating column. However, in a normal Doric temple, that wall, that column shouldn't exist. There should be a wall. The wall should protrude all the way to the edge of the columns. The columns, the porch should be inside protruding wall, same as the other three. So by shortening that wall and making that column a freestanding column, it created an illusion. Looking from the front, it looks almost like a double peristyle. And the double peristyle is a feature of Ionic order. So that's the first kind of blending of the two orders. Another one is a continuous frieze, right? From the outside, the frieze were divided into metope and a triglyph as a normal Doric order here. But the inside, I mean, behind this porch, behind these columns on that wall, the frieze was continuous. So there was no division into metope and triglyph. That continuous wall was carved with a processional parade, presumably copying the procession of the Panathenaic festival. So there was a combination of these two orders. But Erechthum and Parthenon, one is primarily Doric, another is primarily Ionic, but they incorporate the opposite within and created a blending. So yeah, this illustrates that a typical Doric, a typical Ionic, and this is Parthenon. Parthenon was also wider than conventional Doric temple, which has 6 front column, but here it has 8. Right, Parthenon is much wider to provide the space for Phidias' ambitious sculptural program. And Phidias, a sculptor, was usually credited as the main creator of Parthenon, while the architect's name, Ictinus and Cletus, were barely known to public. That, again, confirmed the claim that, or my theory that Greek architecture is kind of more sculptural, because indeed, much finishing, much beauty was created during the final carving process, not necessarily in the piling up of those rudiment material. It is the finishing, the fluting, and sculpting of the temple that brought out the beauty of architecture. So I think I'm going to stop here. We are 1 lecture behind, but that's okay, because if you look at our schedule, we have a day of